Here we are in the studio, back again to show you how to make a simple mushroom. Again, that's our target. And then I did a practice one, and as you can see, there is almost nothing to it. The funny thing is this is going to be a 20-minute video with about 2 minutes worth of fungus at the end of it. The rest of them will be very short. So what do you need? I use toothpicks for the stems. I may change depending on what kinds of mushrooms I want, but for now I'm just using toothpicks. So I just take a flush cutter, cut it. There's enough for 2 stems. I take a little bit of green stuff. I think this is the Army Painter stuff. I like it because it's pre-measured. There should be more of the light green than the blue in the mix. So you can just cut a chunk off, mix it up, and I have mixed 2 balls already, so we don't have to worry about it. If you want to know working with green stuff, and I have some wax paper which helps me form it. If you get your finger wet and then like roll the green stuff around in there, it'll stop it from attaching to you. So these are really simple. I mean, there's nothing fancy about the stem in this particular one. So we're just going to grab a ball of green stuff, get it a little wet around the edges, though with the wax paper it's not that important. I'm going to flatten it just a little bit so it stays put. I'm going to fold the wax paper over like so. Press down a little bit so I get you can see the excuse me, there we go. So you can see the circle going. And then what I'll do is I just put it in the palm of my hand and I push it with my finger, and not only does that spread it out, but it also gets a nice curve going for the mushroom cap. So I do that, and there we are. There's the mushroom cap with a nice curve because of using the palm of my hand. And then I want to ideally peel off the bottom. There we go. And then if I need to, I can get my hand in there and just kind of use my fingers to once again enhance the curve or thin the edges. But it's all very simple. So there you go. Now you can see that I've got this curved mushroom cap. There are some fingerprints, but they're on the bottom, so they don't really affect anything. And I take my half a toothpick and I put it in the middle, more or less. And then the neat thing is, if you push the toothpick in on the palm of your hand, you'll actually get this as I peel the top off. You'll get a little bit of a raised area and a little wrinkly surface, which is actually really useful. However, very authentic. If you don't like it, you want a smoother cap, I have this little Teflon tool. These are cheap. These are handy. They're sculptor's tools for working with green stuff. You just get them wet and very gently pull down on the mushroom cap to smooth it out a little bit. If you don't like, if it's a little off kilter and you want to make it a little more round, you can push in. Frankly, I like a little bit of irregularity and some of the wrinkles because they would be expanding and drying and running into little sticks, and so you'd get cracks in them. I'm sure if you've seen mushroom caps on your own. And the fact that you've pushed the toothpick in gives you a nice peak. And then all I do for drawing is take a tweezers and put it in my little foam block. You notice I have pushed holes already in the foam block. If you try to push the toothpicks in the foam, they have a tendency to want to get pushed out. So I take a toothpick and I just ram it all the way through so that I know I have holes that aren't going to collapse on me. And we just leave it there. And you can use the same piece of wax paper over and over again. So let me put another one in there. I'm just going to flatten it a little so it stays put. Fold the wax paper over. Push down. Now in this one, I'm going to kind of roll my hand around on it. Spread it out a little bit farther than the last one. There we go. And once again, I'm going to put it in the palm of my hand and push down on the center pretty hard in order to give it a curve, maybe from a couple of different angles. There we go. So this one's going to give me a cap that is a little more like the one on the left, that is more spread out, a little flatter. So now again, I want to carefully peel this off. Now you don't have to use the wax paper. The ones that you saw that I've done that are finished were just done in the palm of my hand, but they have a tendency to pick up a little bit more of the texture in your hand if you do them that way. So I'm just going to cut this one a little flatter. There we go. Anyway, so I'll gently push it in a little bit, like so, and then put it back in my hand so I can keep the curve. I'll push it in a little more. Now I didn't push this one in as hard, so there shouldn't be as pronounced a peak on top. Now let's see if I can get the plastic on, or the paper off. There we go. There we are. Oh, does that look? That looks pretty cool, actually. I really like the texture that the paper gives to the top of the mushroom. I think that's much more realistic than a perfectly smooth. And then a lot of the crinkles are radial, meaning they start in the middle and go out, which is again much more biologic looking than you know, the imprint from the veins in my hand would be. So, but if there's a spot I don't like, a big gash or something, then I'll just I could take my finger, by the way, and just kind of brush over it. Looks like I got a hair in there. There we go. Nope, still got a hair in there. There we go. Anyway, so then you just, once again, you take whatever tool you want to use, you have to use. Remember, you're going to paint over this, so discolorations, things like that aren't going to show up. I'm just going to smooth this out a little bit. Got a nice crack in the sides. You know, the imperfections make it look alive. So I wouldn't worry about it. So there is what it looks like from the side. And that's what it looks like from the top. All right, I think that's perfect. And then I'll take this and I'll put it in a hole. And that's all there is to it. That's how you make a simple, basic mushroom. And you can adjust the cap. You can do all kinds of things. So that's how you form a basic mushroom. It's very simple, does not take long at all. You could do a whole bunch of these in a very short period of time. You could do smaller caps if you wanted, so just don't start with as much of the green stuff. You can use wire instead. So if I wanted to do narrower kind of haystack looking mushrooms, I could use something like this. And that's all there is to it. You just form the little caps very naturally. With a little practice, you can decide if I even had something that had a small ball on the end, I could make very, you know, rolled over caps. I just don't happen to have something. Maybe between now and the next tutorial, I'll figure it out. So that's all there is to doing a basic mushroom cap. Nothing to it. Little toothpick stems, green stuffed mushrooms. Using the wax paper helps you form them and actually gives them some cool texture. And if you wanted to do wire stems, you could, you know, use a pinning wire like this. It could be made out of just about anything. You can even use solder, which would allow you to bend it and you know, give curved stems or whatever. So really simple stuff. I'll let these sit until tomorrow, and then we'll prime and paint them, and we'll pick specific species for them to be. I'll have that all set up by tomorrow. See you then. Here we are the next day, and as you can see, I've pulled the little mushrooms off out of their little drying base. So they're looking very good. One trick I have learned over the years, and maybe it's just because I'm doing something else wrong, but it doesn't seem to me that the green stuff really retains very good adhesive qualities. So what I do is I will add a little bit of super glue to that point where the toothpick meets the base, just to help strengthen it. So to do that, I will put a little bit of super glue on a piece of plastic or a piece of paper. Doesn't matter what. You can get another toothpick. I think I need a little more glue here. There we go. So I'll load up a toothpick with a little bit of super glue, and then just kind of stick it in there. And this super glue is pretty fluid, so I'm just letting its natural properties kind of move it around in there. And so now there's a little bit of super glue on the inside of that cap. I hope you can see it. Maybe you can't. The camera's probably focusing on my hand. There you go. Anyway, I won't make you watch me do all of them, but that's what I'll do before we move on to the next step. Continuing work, I thought I would make some basal swellings on a couple of these mushrooms and show you how to do it. It's very simple. It's also the exact same way we're going to make cups for the mushrooms that need cups. So as you can see, there it is, kind of on a reasonably good viewing angle for you guys, I think. And then if I pull it out, there it is from the side. And I'm kind of guessing on what's in focus here. So to get this effect, all we do is we pick a mushroom, and I have pre-mixed a little bit of green stuff. So I pull off a little bit, I roll it into a ball, which I'm going to do off camera for simplicity's sake. All right, here we are. And now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take the sharp end of the toothpick and push it through the ball, hopefully in the middle. And then once I do that, I'm going to work the ball up the stem of the mushroom. Until I get it to about how high I want the mushroom to be. Make this one maybe a little shorter. I'm going to roll it around on my fingers a little at the base just to kind of stick to it. And at this point, we have a pretty nice cup. However, a cup isn't what I want. I want a mushroom. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to roll it around to kind of push this back down into a ball. So that's all I'm doing. This is high-tech stuff here. And then once I had it, I'm going to use my little tool. Now I can keep spinning it. That's actually how I got the other one. But I think for this one, because it rode up higher than I wanted, I'm going to use this little wet Teflon tool just to push it back down into a ball and then roll it around a little bit to smooth it out. So it looks more like a ball. And then I may even use the side of this tool and kind of spin the tool in my hand, almost like playing a violin. And all I'm doing is try to join the top end of the ball to the stick smoothly. How'd that work? Pretty good. That's actually not bad. So maybe I'll just take the Teflon tool a little bit. You can see my fingerprints on there. So I'm just going to smooth that out a little bit. You want to be careful not to get the Teflon tool so wet that it covers everything in a huge pile of water, because that will affect how well the green stuff sticks. There we go. And I think that's it. So now we have, in essence, what looks like a swollen base. So let's get our little display. So there's our new one. And at a slightly different angle. There's the original one I did. So you can see how those look once they get painted. Those bases are gonna end up the same color as the stem, and you won't know any difference at all. And of course, here's the regular one that we did last night without any base whatsoever. And all three of those are perfectly legitimate. They'd be different species. These two could be the same species. This would have to be something different. All right, well, I'm gonna go prime them, and then we'll come back and talk about which mushrooms these are actually gonna be. Here we are. The mushrooms have been primed and painted white, because white primer isn't actually white, it's more gray. And then I just painted the little bottoms of the bulb stem mushrooms brown, so you could see a little more distinctly what the mushroom is actually going to look like. And I dug around, and I think I found a subject for these to be. These are going to be Cortinarius, violaceus, and if you know about anything about scientific names, the second word in the name is supposed to be something descriptive. Now, many people have used vanity instead and used the second name to be a reflection of their own name. But in this case, it's violaceus, which suggests violet or purple. And indeed, this is called the Violet Webcap. It's found in Britain and Ireland, though it is rare. It varies in color from violet to purple to blue, even to be so dark that it looks black. So the ones that I found pictures of on the internet are dead ringers for Genestealer Purple. So I have this nice airbrush version of Genestealer Purple, so I'm going to start with that. And then I'm going to vary it a little bit using some violet wash, and we'll see how it looks. And if I feel I need to do something else to it, I will. But we're going to start simple. So I get my little block. It's always good to have a block to put things into dry. Let me scoot things up a little bit so they're a little closer to center. Get my brush a little wet. All right, and it looks like this one, if you'll excuse me a minute, one of the problems with my studio is I've got it's a kind of a dirty studio. It's just been a long time. It hasn't been cleaned, or it's been so dirty I haven't been able to clean it because it's got so much crap laying around. Anyway, and I think for your viewing pleasure, there we go. I'm going to grab it with the tweezers, and that way I can manipulate it without having to have my hands all over it. So hopefully this works. I'm just going to take some violet, and in this case, in a lot of cases the gills are a different color than the rest of the mushroom, but not with this buddy. His gills and his stem and the cap all tend to be the same color. And the fact that it's streaky actually plays to my advantage in this case, because if you look at photographs of the real mushrooms, they are streaky. They have lighter spots and dark spots. And then I'm just going to go out like this. There we go. That's all there is to it. Not perfect, but it doesn't need to be. The other thing to keep in mind is that I could have even left little white spots on here, and that would have been perfectly okay, because if you see mushrooms in the wild, they've been nibbled on and bumped into, and a half a dozen other things, and they are full of irregularities and white spots. So Let's do our second one while that first one is drying. I don't really know if you guys want to see the painting parts of these tutorials. I mean, there's not much to it. Maybe you can leave it in the comments section if you want to actually watch me paint, or if you just assume I skip ahead, since I'm not really, this is really a painting. But I'll leave it up to you guys. All right, that's it. Just like that. That's all there is to it. Rinse off the brush. I'm going to trade tweezers here. All right, I'm going to show you one of my top secret tricks. You're going to have to pardon the roar. I have this gadget here. This is basically it's a hair dryer, except it's for hobbying, so I paid probably twice as much as it's worth, but it just kicks out a lot of hot air really fast. Sort of like me. Here we go. All right. Now, let's take a look at the one we did first. So, I could leave it like this. I could wash it. I think it's a little ragged. I see a big white spot that I don't want. So, I'm just going to get a little more purple on there. Give it a little... So I like the streakiness, but I think this is probably a little much. So I'm going to make it a little less streaky. And then on the cap, I'm going to do the same, but I'm going to put most of the second coat down low. So, sorry, I should be doing it up here, unless it's not focusing up here. I guess we'll find out when we watch the video. So, if there were big white patches, I'd do the top, but since there aren't, I just want a little bit heavier coat of the violet around the edges. That works. Put that one up. Grab the next one. Sorry, I have my toothbrush in my mouth, that's why I'm... So that one doesn't look so bad either, so I'm just going to even it out a little bit. I do want it to remain a little blotchy, but not to the point where it looks like I've done a bad job painting. Again, looking at the top of that, I'm hoping you guys can see this, but once again, I'm putting on a second coat, but I'm mainly around the outside edge as opposed to the top. And I just want to, in looking at the photographs of the mushrooms, they seemed a little darker around the edges than they were around the top. So there we go. So I'll grab this. There we are. Shut this so it doesn't dry. So you guys are getting this live, which means I'm not practicing, so I don't know if this is going to look okay or not. Okay, now there's, one of the things you figure out is there's kind of a difference between what is biologically correct and what looks good. And if you look at a lot of award-winning painting of figures, you'll notice that they have ridiculously high variation between the darks and the lights. And that kind of is simply just the case. You see that a lot in painting, and because when you're doing things in miniature like this, you need it. You need to show that there's a difference, And so you need to accentuate your darks a little bit more than normal. You need to accentuate your lights a little bit more than normal. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to add the violet, but I'm not going to drench the whole thing in this dark violet because that'll take all the subtlety out of it. So what I'm going to do, however, in looking at the pictures of these on the internet, which is where I found these, I just dug them up, I noticed that on the stems there were dark patches. Occasionally on the caps, but on the stems they were pretty common. So I'm just going to take this dark wash and put just a couple of spots here and there. And I don't know if these are blemishes or... And then I am going to put some right underneath the cap because this part of the stem would be in shadow. So it would naturally be darker under there. There we go. And the trick is to pull this out a little bit. There we are. And then I am just going to put a couple of dark spots. Maybe this was bruised when it was developing. So there we go. I am going to leave the cap fairly uniform. I don't want to mess with that. But what I'm going to do with the cap is I want a fairly watered down purple, again, to do the edge of the cap. I just want to pull some shadow out into the cap. So I could either thin the purple or I can just make sure that most of it is off. So I will dip my brush up here and then pull most of it off so that there's just a little bit left on here. And then you see I'm pulling the paint out, which I think is going to give me a better kind of a more even effect than if I just ran around in a ring. You know, I think pulling the paint back towards the edge is going to look better ultimately. All right. Now, because I want this to dry, but I don't want this to dry in blobs, I'm not going to use the heater on it. Because the heater has a tendency to dry things out very quickly, which is great, except that it also will make it dry thick, if you know what I mean. The pigment will tend to concentrate, and it'll look like you just put a line of this around there. So now that I've got it set, I am gonna pull it up a little bit. And again, this is just to make sure that it doesn't end up just all concentrating as a blob of color at the very edges. I do want the edges to be darker, but I don't want them to look like I just blobbed color on them. All right, so now we'll do the second one. Same thing. Start by adding a fairly generous amount of shading right under the cap. And then I actually don't care as much if it leaves kind of a blob, because, you know, the shadow could be fairly severe, you know, as far as what's on and what's on it and what's off. I could also apply that if I wanted to the gills. Not that anybody's going to really see them, but, you know, just for argument's sake, I'll leave that as an option. So there I have my dark patches. And again, with the dark patches, I don't care if they dry kind of blobby, because that's kind of how they look on the fungus. But on the cap, I want to be careful. So once again, we're going to put a little on there. We're going to pull the excess off. And I'm just going to go around. I think the last one I went around twice. And just, oops, I should probably use a clamp or something, tweezers to hold this, rather than my fingers. So I'm just going to pull it to the outside edge, spin it around to get the fresh edge, pull off the excess, and draw it to the outside. There we go. That's one time around. Looks pretty good, actually. So Maybe I won't do it twice. Put that in the little foam, and then do just the opposite. I'm going to draw it up. Not all the way to the top. I'm just drawing it up a little bit so it doesn't gather, quote unquote, at the outside edge. And if I decide I need more, so let's go back to the original one. If I decided I wanted a little more color, then I could once again do the same thing. I just go around the outside. And I'm drawing it back towards the edge. So I am adding color over probably 1/3 to 1/2 of the cap. But if there's going to be a blob of color, I want it to be at the edge, not at the top. That one's looking pretty good. All right, looks like the other one's ready. So I like the way that adding that extra color looked. So I'm gonna do the same thing to this one. Yeah, I'm basically using the profile of the brush, I mean the shape of the brush. So when I'm doing this, I'm adding, you know, thin bit of color at the up higher, and then as I press down, I'm just adding a thicker band of color at the bottom. There. All right, we're going to let these dry naturally. So I'm going to shut the camera off. It won't take that long, but I'll save you a couple of minutes of viewing time. And then we'll go spray them with a protective coat, and then we'll go find somewhere to put them, and you can judge for yourself how they look. Here we are with our finished Cortinarius violaceus. And one of the things while I was reading about the fungi is that they are associated with birch. Might be mycorrhizal, which means that they actually grow in the living birch roots. However, they do not damage the birch roots by, they actually find nutrients and help bring them to the roots. So it's a very positive association between the fungi and the plant. And these are really common in trees. Actually, most species of trees have mycorrhizal fungi, so they're symbiotic. Benefits both organisms. So what I've done is I pulled out one of I just happen to have a nice big grove of birch that needs some interesting highlighting as far as in purple and yellow go together really well. So what I'm going to do now, of course I have these big toothpicks, which as you have seen have been very handy for keeping track and holding on and putting them in the block, but they're a little too big for where I'm going to put them. So I'm just going to take my flush cutters. I am going to cut them. Now what I've done is I figured out where I wanted the fungi to be on this little diorama and have pre-drilled the holes. Cork is very healing, which is great for a lot of things, but does make it a little tricky to get stuff to stay in it without getting pushed out. So I am just going to put, that should be plenty. And I'm putting the flush end up. And then, pardon my hand, I'm going to cut that there. And I'm going to do the same thing for the other one. There we go. And then I don't want any of these bits sticking out. So I'm just going to, because even with the flush cutting it, they get a little. All right. So that's all there is to it. So first I'm going to test to make sure I drilled my holes correctly. So I'm going to stick that sucker in there and see if it goes in. And it does not. So you guys get to see a little drilling with my rotary tool here. So I'm just kind of moving it around in an attempt to make the hole larger. If that doesn't work, I can switch drills, but I'm hoping I don't have to do that. So let's see. Turn that so you can see it. See the hole in the back. There we go. Now, that will stay there. I can glue it if I want to, If it was perhaps in a more vulnerable spot, I could glue it, but the odds are that that will never get bumped hard enough to glue. And then the second spot I picked out, you can see right there. And I did actually enlarge that hole earlier. So we're gonna double check. It still may be a little big. So the other options, rather than making the hole bigger, you can make the toothpick smaller. And I think it's mainly just at the edge that you're trying to get in. So what I'm thinking is if I make this a little narrower initially, I should be able to slide it in without a lot of trouble because I already did the enlarging. It's awfully tight. I don't want to ruin the mushroom. Remember, this is just green stuff, so if you push down hard on it, you can mess it up. So we'll do a little bit of drilling again. That should do it. Come back here, you. Oh yeah. And there we go. And then I can turn it, you know, however I want to fit the hole. Though this seems to be pretty good where I put it. Now this may be one that I ultimately put some glue in because they're just kind of sticking out, so it's more likely to get bumped. So we've got that one right there and that one right there. So they're not right on top of each other, but they're in different aspects, different points on this little place, and gives a nice little purplish tone. And I will take the camera off, take it over to the little Lazy Susan, and give you some nice close-up pictures of what it looks like from eye level. Here we are. Sorry, I'm hand holding the camera, so it's a little unsteady compared to what you're used to seeing. But as I turn the trees around, you can see our beautiful fungi come into view. Give a little bit of a purple whammy to all the yellow around them. And so not only are they pretty and they serve a nice aesthetic, but they're legitimate fungi for this group of trees, if not for Japan. But you know, you can't have it all. So there you go. There is our fungi of the day. Oh, there we go. One in the background, one in the foreground. Pretty easy to make. I'm sure you guys can do it. And I think a decent way to start off our first MicroMyco tutorial. So thank you guys. Please like, subscribe, and comment if you can. And we'll see you next time on Gitsapalooza.